Hell ho 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 and welcome to Become the Teapot. I'm Iain.
And Snow am I.
As you may have already figured out, this is our very first Christmas episode, so Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, or whatever your preferred seasonal greeting may be. For those of you listening for the first time, welcome, where have you been? This is a podcast where we discuss one film in relation to the comic books that, at least in part, inspired it. And this episode, 'tis the season for a Christmas movie. Will there be families coming together to tell a story that could only be told against this, the most festive time of year? No. But there will be the occasional Christmas tree in shot, and that's good enough for us. So hold on to your baubles and prepare to get festive as we discuss the merriest Marvel movie of all, Iron Man 3. And as if that wasn't enough for our Yuletide special, how about a comic book that's set in November and has absolutely nothing to do with Christmas? It does, however, have a lot to do with the film. That's right. Deck the halls and Feliz Navidad, it's Iron Man Extremis by Warren Ellis. So, you've already said in a previous episode that this is one of your least favourite Marvel Cinematic Universe films. But what are your thoughts on the film in general?
Well, I do like it. I'm not saying it's a bad film. As you said, it's not one of my favourites, but it does have really good ideas, and I like what they try to do with it. I think one of the main story points that I do like is the idea if you take away his suit, would you still count Tony Stark as Iron Man?
Yeah.
So I do like that arc.
Because he spends most of this film without his suit, doesn't he? You know, either it's out of commission or he's got a part of it or things like that. They seem to have gone to real efforts to make sure he doesn't have the suit for the vast majority of the film.
Yeah, I mean, right at the start, obviously he's tinkering away, and you can tell that he's been down there for ages. I think it's 72 hours or something, or he hasn't slept for 3 days or something like that.
It says something like that, yeah.
So it shows that he's suffering from PTSD following the Avengers, because this is the first film after the Avengers.
Yeah, they were careful not to use the term PTSD, except when I think Harley asks him if he has PTSD and he says no at some point. But
and then he has an anxiety attack or a panic attack.
He keeps having the anxiety attacks. I presume that's just in case people with actual PTSD felt it was a little bit insensitive, but he certainly kept having those anxiety attacks.
Yeah, I mean, talking about Iron Man then, I do like Robert Downey Jr.'s portrayal as Iron Man. He's clever, he's witty, he's cocky, and he's just the right level of douchey, but not over the top.
Yeah. I mean, he's very much Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark, isn't it? I mean, it's not a lot like the character was in the comic books prior to Robert Downey Jr. getting the role, and the character in the comic has actually become more like him in the films as time has gone on. So yeah, I mean, the character has sort of been Robert Downey Jr. playing Robert Downey Jr. to a certain extent.
Yeah, we spoke about the same kind of thing last episode where Ryan Reynolds plays himself in all his films, but I think with this, it does work.
Yeah. I think the character that Robert Downey Jr. has created works better as Tony Stark than the character that Ryan Reynolds played in Green Lantern, which it just didn't seem that reminiscent of Howard Jordan at all. So even though it's quite a different take on it, it's still roughly recognisable as Tony Stark.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think we could sit here and talk about his portrayal all day, but I think we should talk about...
I couldn't.
I think we should talk about the villains in this.
Yeah. I mean, we go straight on to the villains, yeah. So what do you make of them?
Well, who would you class as the big bad in this?
I mean, I think it's probably Aldrich Killian. You know, he's in the first scene, he's throughout the film, and ultimately he's the main fight at the end. Why? Would you consider someone else the main villain?
Well, I mean, there's a bit of a mixture of him and the Mandarin, although they sort of turned him into the Mandarin, which I don't quite like that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, he's also, they've put him in charge of Advanced Idea Mechanics, or AIM, which is a villainous organisation in the comic books. So they've sort of made those the villains as well.
Yeah, so with what they did with the Mandarin, I mean, I don't mind it. Well,
it seems like you mind it.
I don't like how they handled the Mandarin character. I don't mind and actually quite like Ben Kingsley's portrayal of the fake Mandarin, but I don't like how they made Killian the real Mandarin.
Yeah, I think I agree with you. I really like the whole Ben Kingsley fake Mandarin plotline. I think the reveal is funny, and I've not watched this actually in a few years. So rewatching it again with the knowledge of the twist in advance, it's pretty obvious actually throughout the film that something is up there. You know, he doesn't appear outside of those little news segments. You know, the action doesn't cut away to him as a character throughout the film, you know, as it does with some of the others. Yeah, no, I think they did a really interesting job with that. And like you say, I just feel like that I am the Mandarin line at the end for Killian is a little bit tagged on.
Yeah, it's a little bit on the nose, really.
Yeah, and I think that's partly because, from what I understand, Maya Hansen was meant to play more of a villainous character, more of a role in the film.
Yeah.
And that was ultimately changed at the behest of one of the producers, who luckily is no longer one of the producers of these films. He was basically the guy who said that girls don't play with toys, so there was no Black Widow action figures. And it's why Maya Hansen couldn't be the villain of this film, because every kid wants a Killian toy.
Well, if I was 12, I don't think I would. But yeah, I mean, the idea of Ben Kingsley or Trevor, that there's someone behind him, it would have been nice if the person behind him was the real person, you know, the guy who had the 10 rings and was in charge of the group. Is it just called 10 rings?
It's the 10 rings. Yeah. I mean, in the one shot, All Hail the King, they do introduce that as an element, as the idea that there is a real Mandarin out there in charge of the real 10 rings, and that it was sort of co-opted by Killian and used for his own means.
Yeah, I mean, to me, that kind of felt like a retcon, kind of, we didn't get the reaction we wanted from the film. Quickly, let's just make this one shot.
Yeah, I mean, it was without a doubt a retcon, absolutely. But, you know, obviously they have now cast Mandarin for the upcoming Shang-Chi film. So, you know, he is going to be a real present villain in an upcoming film.
Yeah, because there was a mention of the 10 rings in Iron Man 1.
Yes.
So watching Iron Man 1 after you watch Iron Man 3, you kind of think, well, surely that can't be Killian.
Yeah, it does make sense. But I think that's part of this idea of this think tank terrorist, where they have taken all the disparate elements of terrorism, you know, so there's sort of a South American despot, there's a Middle Eastern extremist, there's a sort of Southern Baptist minister voice involved. You know, they've created this archetypal terrorist from all these elements. And I think that's the whole point, is they've drawn on an existing terrorist group, the 10 Rings, to use for that.
I don't quite know where the fake Mandarin is supposed to be from, because he kind of sounds like he's from America. Just how he says things like tourist and America.
Yeah, well, that's, again, another hint that he is, first of all, an actor, which I've quite liked, because it sounds so artificial. But also, again, it's that sort of Southern Baptist preacher, that sort of charismatic figure, you know, the terrorist designed by committee. And I think the sort of reveal of him as Trevor Slattery, the sort of English football hooligan lout / lovey actor, I think it's handled well. And
Yeah.
I understand that a lot of people didn't like that, but I think you can only really judge these things on the film itself. And I think in the context of the film, it was funny. I liked it.
Yeah, it's quite hard to take comic arcs and put them within the MCU without having to change things.
I think especially with a character like the Mandarin, which could be very Yellow Peril and Fu Manchu-esque, you know, could be very racially insensitive. I think adapting it in the way they have probably is the safest bet. I think then adding the Killian I am the Mandarin on top of that was probably a step too far.
Yeah, because I know there was talk about whitewashing when the casting announcement came out that it was Ben Kingsley.
Yeah.
I think people were a little bit like, well, how can he play this character that's not supposed to be white?
Yeah.
But then it's explained well. But as you said, the little dash on top that is actually Killian is a little bit too far.
Yeah, definitely. But yeah, as I say, I mean, supposedly Maya Hansen was meant to be a more villainous role, and I would have liked to have seen her being the ultimate sort of villain. I don't know if that was their intent, or if they, you know, she was just meant to be more of a character than she actually was in the finished film, but I think that would have been a more interesting twist than having the character who was in the first scene and very villainous in all of his appearances after that be revealed to be the villain. Was not a big twist, was it?
Yeah, and then how that she was just sort of killed off towards the end.
Yeah, I think that was a real shame.
It was handled poorly.
Definitely, because she had a bit of charisma to her, and it was, you know, there was an interesting dynamic there, and then she just gets shot and never mentioned again, which I think is a real shame.
And she kind of has that history with Tony as well, the fact that they met in Berlin in...
It was Switzerland,
99.
wasn't it?
Switzerland, there you go. Yeah, so the idea that she was trying to find him to then get the formula or to change this thing for what I assume was the good, and then Killian came in and just ruined it.
Yeah, Yeah, I just made her a bit more passive, didn't it? But then they still had her be ultimately a sort of a villainous character, but they didn't go all in on that idea. Whereas I think that if they had built on what they did in the comic books, which we'll go on to later, they could have had an interesting villain there as a sort of behind-the-scenes surprise. But yeah, instead she sort of reveals herself to be a villain and then is shot in the very next scene that she's in. So
yeah, it's a little bit shame. I think you can see that this is the first Iron Man film that wasn't directed by, what's his name?
Jon Favreau.
Thank you. I think there are points in it that you can sort of see that it's not his kind of style.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely a Shane Black film. I mean, right down to being set at Christmas, which I think about 90% of his films are. You know, he's got a real thing for it. But I like that. You know, it's got that buddy cop mentality that you get in The Nice Guys and, you know, the Lethal Weapon films, Kiss Kiss Bang Bang, which was obviously one of the films that put Robert Downey Jr. back in contention for this film. You know, puts him back into the limelight. So it sort of came full circle that the man who directed him in that film to come and direct this. I think it works within the context of this film. It's Shane Black's style.
I mean, I would have liked to see Jon Favreau's third film.
Yeah, I think he was a bit burnt out by Iron Man 2 and its rushed production schedule. I think he wasn't particularly pleased with how it turned out, and as such didn't want to direct the third one, from what I understand. Because of that, you know, I kind of agree with him. I didn't really like the way the second one turned out either. I thought it was a bit of a missed opportunity, because I think it came out less than 2 years after the first one, so it was a bit of a rush job.
Yeah, it is quite nice that he came back to play the happy character.
Yeah.
So it's nice that he didn't just walk away completely.
Yeah, definitely.
And he had to recast him like they did with War Machine.
And I think part of that is, again, getting rid of the producer that was troublesome has sort of helped that relationship between Disney and Jon Favreau. Obviously, he went on to then direct The Lion King for them, and he's spearheading The Mandalorian on Disney Plus. So yeah, I think they've got a good working relationship there because of that.
What did you take on the rebranding of War Machine to Iron Patriot?
Yeah, I think it worked within the context. Do you know much about Iron Patriot in the comic books?
No, you've told me some stuff off air about Norman Osborn, I think it is.
Yes. So Norman Osborn, during a Dark Reign storyline, rebrands himself as the Iron Patriot of the Dark Avengers, which are all sort of versions of the Avengers in the public eye, but all of them replaced with a villainous character. So Bullseye as Hawkeye, etc. And yeah, obviously Norman Osborn was being the Tony Stark Iron Man character as Iron Patriot. It's been a couple of other people in the comic books, but that's sort of been subsequent to this film, I think, most of those. So they did make War Machine Iron Patriot in the comics at one point, but it wasn't the main one.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, I think Iron Patriot, it's War Machine with a paint job, really, isn't it, in this? And it's done in that sort of Captain America the First Avenger setup where it's a propaganda piece. It's, hey, look, we can put the red, white and blue on his armor and all of a sudden he's a patriot. You know, we can sell this around the world.
Yeah, even though it's the same person with all the guns. Yeah. But hey, he's American.
Yeah, and a bit of a commentary on sort of American global imperialism there. And, you know, these sort of images of him going around the world to Pakistan and bursting in on sweatshops and family meetings and things like that, and not encountering any terrorists and being a bit ineffectual.
Yeah, there is quite a lot crammed into this. I mean, as you said, we've got 3 bad characters, War Machine, you've got the Extremis virus, I guess it's called.
Yeah. The Extremis, you've got 3 or 4 of them, isn't there? You know, different characters injected with that and you know, blowing up, and all these additional little baddies as well. So yeah, there's quite a lot going on.
There are points when it seems a little bit too much, but I think it does work as a whole.
Yeah, I think they link the things enough so that it all comes together in the end. And, you know, even though some of those threads can seem quite disparate at the beginning, they sort of come to a satisfying conclusion, which I wouldn't say was the case for Green Lantern last week. But yeah, I mean, in terms of the Extremis virus, obviously, you've got various characters who are injected with that throughout the film, most of whom are actually characters from the comic books. I don't know if you are aware of this. None of them actually related to Extremis, really. There is Ellen Brandt, who is a minor character from Man-Thing. There was Eric Savin, was the main henchman. Eric Savin is in the comic books a character called Coldblood 7. And then there's also Jack Taggart, who is a character called Firepower in the comics. None of these characters have got anything to do with Extremis, but they just sort of took the names and applied them to these characters as they needed them, basically. The same thing they kind of did with Aldrich Killian from the comic books.
Who's the henchman, if you will, that's like bold and always chewing gum?
That was Eric Savin. Coldblood 7 in the comics.
He's got that thing where, because he looks quite hard and he's always chewing gum, He's clearly a bad guy.
Instantly unlikable.
Regarding the end, when Pepper is injected with the virus, is that something that happens in the comic?
No, not really. She gets her own armor, much more akin to Endgame. She gets an armor called Rescue, is her code name.
Yep.
In fact, her whole central ethos with the Rescue armor was that it was an armor designed not for combat and didn't have any sort of combat function. It was all about rescue and things like that.
Helping out.
Yeah, that's what it was. It was for emergency services and things like that, which was a really interesting take on a superhero, one that wasn't just going to go and, have a punch up with someone at a moment's notice.
I do like that, there's a little bit of foreshadowing.
Your favourite?
When she gets that suit. There is something else, actually, that I did pick up on. It's right at the start when Happy calls Tony. He looks up AIM. And because he's got a holographic phone or a screen, you see it says AIM, but backwards. So MIA, which again, that comes up
later on. Yeah, no, that's right, yeah. And then, of course, you've got the ultimate ending of the film, which is Iron Man blowing up all of his armour in a sort of show of defiance and love for Pepper, which then doesn't really go anywhere in subsequent films, does it? Because he's got it all back in the next Avengers.
Yeah, I was thinking about this because, the next one is Age of Ultron, isn't it?
The next one that Tony's in, yeah, I think so.
Yeah, so he sort of turns up and he's just sort of there and it's not ever commented on. But the way that I took that is that he's been spending so much time working on all of his suit that when he then explodes them all, I took that as, right, well, I will still have some suits, but I'm not going to be as obsessed with them.
Yeah, but blowing them up seemed like a waste of time and money.
Yeah, wow. He's Tony Stark, so he's got cash to burn.
But yeah, so what did you make of the character of Harley, the precocious young man who he meets? Just because you're staring at me blankly as if you don't know who Harley is.
No, sorry. I do. I was just thinking that regarding these types of films, when you put a child character as part of it, they can be a bit of a pain in the arse and whiny and whingy. He's actually all right. He doesn't annoy me, really, which I'm surprised.
Yeah, that's fair enough. I mean, yeah, because Shane Black has done this in several of his other films where he will have a sort of overly worldly child. Basically, a child who acts much more adult than, well, many of the adults around them. So when I saw it in the cinema, I thought, oh, that's cute. And then I watched The Nice Guys and I noticed it was in that as well. And then it becomes a sort of trope that you notice a lot when you think, well, these kids are weird. What is wrong with these weird kids? Why isn't this kid playing with Lego or whatever? Just... Yeah,
a little bit of an odd character, but I didn't find him as annoying as I thought that I would.
You've said about this before in our V for Vendetta episode. You said about if Evie was portrayed as a child, you would have found her annoying. What children in films in particular do you find annoying? You don't have an answer, do you?
No.
You don't find children in films annoying at all. You've got this idea in your head.
Well, to me, I think that when children are in films, they're in there to be a pain or to be whiny.
Give me an example.
Jurassic Park.
No, that's a fair example, actually. They are fucking irritating. Right. We've gone completely off topic now. So shall we go on to the comic books?
Yeah, I think we've discussed this film plenty.
Okay, so outside of the films, how familiar were you with Tony Stark, with Iron Man as a character?
Well, I've never read an Iron Man comic. I have read comics with Iron Man in him.
Right.
So Civil War, Age of Ultron, those sort of comics.
Okay, so sort of crossover events, and ones that typically, one of the main critiques of those is that the characters do not act as themselves.
Yeah, I think it might be because, and do prove me wrong, which you do tend to, with those sort of crossover comics, it's not the writer that's been writing the characters for years.
Not always, no. So what were your first thoughts of this as a comic book then?
Well, my first thoughts of this one, especially within the first couple of pages, was that Tony Stark clearly hates himself. I'm not sure what he's going through or what previous storyline or arc this came off of, but there's that sense that he doesn't like who he's become. I mean, this comic as well, in my thoughts, it was very similar to Green Lantern Rebirth in a way that you've got flashbacks to the history of Iron Man.
Yeah, no, definitely. And in fact, this and Rebirth are comics credited with bringing their respective characters into the 21st century and updating them for a modern reader. Extremis, the run, is often listed as one of Iron Man's best stories. And it's the thing that sort of recontextualized Tony Stark as a futurist, as someone who is obsessed with the future and updating and ever-growing technology. There were elements of that before, but it's something that really solidified that.
That also explains why Hawkeye calls him the futurist at the end of Civil War.
Yeah, I mean, that is what Tony Stark became within all contexts and within the films as well.
I do like how the character was portrayed at the start of the first one.
Mm-hmm.
There's the interview with Mr. Pillinger,
I think, yeah.
Pillinger. Yeah, so there's the back and forth there, sort of similar to, I'm not sure if you've seen Frost Nixon.
Yeah, there was.
That sort of vibe to it. But also the character of Pillinger. I got a sense that he was like a sort of a Louis Theroux character, but just a lot more smarter.
Than Louis Theroux? How dare you? Louis Theroux's whole deal is he's much more intelligent than he lets on. Whereas I felt that Mr. Pillinger in this is a lot more combative. And Tony makes a point to say that, you know, he hasn't let him elaborate on one of his answers since the interview began. The character would keep asking Tony Stark a leading question. Tony would give half an answer and then Mr. Pillinger would interrupt him. And seeing that dynamic and back and forth and then Tony sort of undermining him at the end, I thought that was quite a nice way of setting up who Tony Stark is.
Yeah, it's like Tony's being interrogated and then towards the end Tony then takes charge of the conversation. Yeah, that part of it I really enjoyed.
Yeah, and then he very much undermines the character and shuts him down in a dismissive manner. In one interview, it sort of establishes what kind of character Tony is, you know, his background, but also that he can be quite ruthless and quite brutal in many ways.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously from there, the story carries on to the Extremis storyline, which is obviously very different from that of the film. What did you make of it in the comic book?
Well, I was actually very shocked about how much page time, I guess you call it, that Killian has. Sorry to ruin it for people who haven't picked it up, but he kills himself on the second page.
Yeah, that's right. And they sort of combined for the film the characters of Killian and Malin, Malin being the primary antagonist of the comic book. So they sort of combined those two characters and just gave it Killian's name, whereas in this, he's a very minor character, isn't he?
Yeah, it made me think that he would come back because of the Extremis virus.
Yeah.
But he didn't.
And this sort of ties into what I was saying before about how they just, for the film, they just seem to have taken characters' names from the comic books and just applied them to any old random character.
Yeah.
And said, that'll do.
These little, like, tidbits, I guess you call them. Go, oh, here's that character's name.
Yeah, it's a little reference, a little tip of the hat to comic book fans. I mean, I don't think there was anyone clamouring for a Cold Blood 7 film, so I don't think many people are going to be upset that they've used that character in another role in the films.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's still a strange choice when you see that they just sort of threw those random names on any old character, really.
I mean, going back to how Stark is portrayed, I think he does go a little bit mad with power. He wants to make the Iron Man stronger and finding it hard to separate himself and the Iron Man. And then towards the end of it, he puts them together and then he is the Iron Man. So Tony and Iron Man is the same person.
Yeah, I mean, it's something that's always been a part of Tony Stark's background. Obviously not so much in the Silver Age because things were a lot lighter back then, but obsession with development, especially in this era going forward, became a big central role in Tony Stark's character, is this idea of ever improving, of being a futurist. It also ties into him. Obviously Tony has an addictive personality, and there's a certain story element to it where he is replacing one obsession or one addiction of alcohol with an addiction towards, you know, ever improving and ever updating technology, which is equally unhealthy.
Yeah, it depends in what sort of way that affects you.
I mean, it certainly led him down some very dark paths in the comic books going forward.
I think, there is also that point as well that I think he's asked to step down from CEO, but then he has this thing, well, as soon as I step down, you're then going to sign contracts with government and we're going to go back to the way it was, which he's solely against.
Yeah, what I noticed is rereading Extremis is actually how it inspired all three of the Iron Man films, really, rather than just this one that we were watching this week.
Yeah, so this came out 2005, 2006, that sort of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, so there are a fair few references. I mean, there's the bit where he's fighting... So who's the bad guy that he keeps fighting in this?
Malin,
him. So when he's fighting him, when I think Tony gets thrown and hits a car, and the guy then picks up a car and then crushes Iron Man, very similar to Iron Man 1 when he's fighting Killmonger.
Yeah. And part of that is because Adi Granov, the artist on this book, he's mostly known for his cover arts, but this is quite a rare occasion where he did all of the internal arts as well.
Okay.
But he was actually hired to be the concept designer for the first Iron Man. So after this, he went on to do that.
Did he also continue the concept art for Iron Man 2 and 3?
That I don't know, actually. He later went on to do concept art for the Avengers and I think Amazing Spider-Man films, but I don't know about Iron Man 2 and 3.
The only reason why I bring that up is because there are also points in this that went into Iron Man 2 that I saw, such as he says about having the suit within a briefcase. So I thought maybe they got the idea for that.
That predates this. In fact, I think that was in the cartoon. But it does show that this 6-issue run inspired a lot of what came afterwards in terms of both the representation of Tony Stark in the comics, but also in the films.
Yeah, there's also the bit when the under the suit armor he has comes out of him and covers his body, similar to Infinity War or Endgame, I can't remember, with the nanotechnology.
Yeah, they sort of transposed it into nanotechnology in the films, didn't they? These sort of little nanobots that you can shift around. But it's very much, aesthetically, it's a similar thing.
Regarding the artwork in the comic, I did like the fight scenes. They are very fluent. You know, you do get a real sense of what's happening and the action as well. And they've got, 2 or 3 pages when you've got a couple of lines of dialogue that's just purely artwork, which is obviously the complete opposite of the old comics that we've read.
Yeah, it's quite cinematic in its storytelling. So it uses dialogue and the occasional, pop up on screen to say the date or things like that. It doesn't really use anything outside of that. So there's no thought balloons and there's no text boxes. It is all what the characters are saying and what the characters are doing. But the art is probably one of the things I liked the least about this comic book. For me, it's all a bit clean. It looks a bit too stark at times. The backgrounds are a little bit bare. And I actually found that Adi Granov, the artist, he's known for doing front covers. And I found that a lot of the art didn't transition from panel to panel that well. I found that it looked a lot like a lot of separate still images, which I know that is what comics are. But it felt like the transitioning between that, it was just a selection of pin-ups as opposed to necessarily a continuation of one scene.
Yeah, I get what you mean. I think that works well with the fight scenes because it is just like punch to punch, or, it cuts like it would a film.
Yeah.
But then with just the scenes where he's walking around, or he's talking to Maya or whoever, it is a little bit stunted, I guess.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I also thought it was strange that in a lot of shots he seemed to be Tom Cruise. Clearly there was some sort of visual representation taken there.
Yeah, I mean, especially with the close-ups on his face changes throughout the whole thing. There's bits where he looks quite thin and quite normal, I guess. There's other ones where his face is quite big and chubby. I don't know whether that's to show that he's swollen because he's just been in a fight. Probably
just the art he chose to, I think he takes an existing photo and uses that. So it probably just depends on the photo he chose. But yeah, I noticed that as well. Sometimes when he's like lying down, he looks very chunky.
Yeah.
But yeah, a lot of times he looked like Tom Cruise, and that was quite distracting at times. It reminds me, there was a run later on where he was just where Tony Stark was entirely drawn like Sawyer from Lost. It was very distracting a lot of time.
Well, I do think that, let's say the MCU came out in the 90s, I think Tom Cruise would be Iron Man.
Oh, yeah. Without that. I mean, I think he was in contention for the role, actually. What they probably found is that at this point, Marvel didn't have the budget to stretch to Tom Cruise being Tony Stark. But, nowadays, that's a different story.
Well, yeah.
Obviously, at this point, you got to think Marvel Studios was very much an unknown entity at the time. The first Iron Man, I think Robert Downey Jr. was paid less than Terrence Howard.
Yeah.
There was no way they were going to get Tom Cruise for that budget. Yeah, I think that's probably worked out for the better, all things considered.
Right, so it's happened again. We've taken a deviation from the comic.
Yeah. All right, let's get back to it.
Yeah, so, I mean, you've read this before.
Yes.
I mean, I find that the way that they handled the Extremis virus, it's completely a separate thing entirely to the film.
Yeah.
It did surprise me that Tony then wanted to take it.
Yeah, because we only really see one person take the Extremis virus. It doesn't cause people to explode. All it is a sort of experimental super soldier serum, essentially designed for healing. It doesn't surprise me that Tony Stark would take it later on in the comic book, and it doesn't surprise me that he would want to adapt it for his own needs. And I liked that looked at what technology was going towards, realised that a man in an iron shell is not modern technology in 2005, 2006 when this was written, and updated it. In fact, a lot of the technology, the phone that they talk about him being able to download an MP3 in a matter of seconds, and it having updated Bluetooth. You can access your computer via Wi-Fi and Bluetooth. These were revolutionary concepts when they were talking about that in this comic book, but they've all come true.
Yeah.
So I think what the comic does well is brings Tony Stark, who is meant to be an up-to-date technological genius, into the 21st century, rather than being a man in a iron suit going around firing repulsors at people.
Well, yeah, you've got to think as well that he is just a human and has this suit on. So if he gets punched in the face, that punch won't hurt him, but his head's in the suit. So
yeah, it's like in this where his hand gets crushed and then he takes the glove off and his physical hand is absolutely ruined and bloody and all the bones are broken.
I did like, actually, after he took the Extremis virus, how you see the X-ray of his hand healing.
Yeah.
That artwork style I did like. I kind of felt that I could hear the bones click.
There's a lot of very visceral violence in this when the character of Malin goes in, initially has the terrorist attack at the beginning of the comic. There's those moments where he punches people and it does feel very visceral, feels very physical. I think that's the stuff that the comic does well. As I say, well, as you said as well, the scenes where there are just characters talking or characters walking and moving felt less fluid to me.
I do like as well that particular fight style, I guess, when in the comics that guy does put his hand through someone, very similar to Killian tries to do it to Tony in the film. Obviously, he jumps out of a suit, but I do like that they sort of carried the sort of powers across to the film.
Yeah, there's a few moments like that. There's the fire breathing and the moment where Tony Stark lets his unibeam, the central heart piece of his armor, burst a hole straight through Malin in this, but obviously in the film it's Savin. But I mean, so this is your first comic reading Tony Stark that wasn't a crossover event.
Yeah.
You said about him being self-loathing. What do you make of Tony Stark in the comic as opposed to the film?
I mean, as we've already said, in the film, it's literally just Robert Downey Jr. In the comic, I mean, I'm not sure if I like him or not, really. He's quite hard to like as a character. I think as well, I mean, I've not read more, but from my understanding, since the Iron Man films have been so successful in the MCU, they've now started to write their character like the film character.
Yeah, definitely. They've made him more quippy and more sarcastic. In this he's a much more serious character, but obviously since then, like with a lot of other characters, they've made them more like their film counterparts.
Yeah, he's quite hard to like, and he's always on that hunt to become more powerful.
Yeah,
he wants to have the power to be in control. Yeah, and especially with his company as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is a thing as well. The central dynamic between the hero and villain of this piece is that Tony Stark is a character who is constantly looking towards the future, whereas Malin is a character who is always looking towards the past, and the idea that things used to be better.
Yeah.
Whereas Tony Stark is things can always be better and things can always be improved upon. In fact, last of all, let's talk about the villains then. So we've got Malin and we've got also Maya Hansen. So what did you make of them in the comic book?
Well, with Malin, we've sort of covered a lot about him so far, but he's just the bad guy that has fights, really. He's the main antagonist. He's the one that when you read this, you're like, right, he's the big bad. With Maya, there's a lot of back and forth with her and Tony. So you get this sort of friendship vibe. They trust each other. Like, I think there's a line in there, when I call, you answer. And then at the end, when you find out that she was the one that helped Killian to release the virus, I didn't expect that. I think I was too focused on the fighting and too focused on Tony taking Extremis that it was quite a shock to me almost. And I think the same with him. He was too obsessed with trying to become a lot more powerful and to win the fight that then I think towards the middle of it, they say about you have to have 2 cards to open the door. Yeah. Which if I was trying to find things like that, I would have picked up on it. So when Tony at the end said, well, you need 2 cards for this, so therefore your card was used, you allowed the virus to leak out. Which, I was taken back by that. It was something that I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, it layers it in there gently, doesn't it? For keen-eyed readers or for rereads, it's there, but it's not a central point. And I think if they had done something similar with Maya Hansen in the film, which I feel like they might have been leaning towards originally, then that probably would have worked better than the Killian reveal.
Yeah, I mean, something else with the comic as well regarding superheroes and their secret identity. I think it's in the first or second one that you find out that it is still his secret. I don't think it's mentioned who knows until he turns up at Future Farm, which is a dumb name. I think that sounds to me like it's the first name that they just went, let's just think of a name. Future Farm? Yeah, all right,
Yeah.
tick.
It's kind of like how in Avatar, where they have unobtainium, and it's like a placeholder name that they think, oh, I'll replace that later, but they just forget.
But yeah, so he turns up there and then he tells the whole team to leave apart from Maya. And she's like, oh, it's you. I thought Iron Man was your bodyguard. To me, that if people know he's made the suit and Iron Man is his bodyguard, surely you would put two and two together.
Well, no, that's the whole central conceit was that Tony Stark had created this Iron Man armor, and the ongoing alibi for Tony Stark was that it was his bodyguard. And it was only around the time of the first film that they decided to do away with that and introduce the idea that Tony was just very open about his secret. But I think because of the popularity of that, I think a lot of people in your position think that Tony Stark has just always been open and honest about being Iron Man, but it was really only very recently that has become the case.
I mean, I was quite surprised as well that there was no Happy in this. There was no Pepper Potts. Even Jarvis isn't in it. There is a character of Mrs. Brenny.
Yep.
Is that a real person or is that the voice inside his suit?
No, I believe that was his PA at this point.
Right, okay. Because from my understanding, there was no voice inside of his suit.
No, that is again a film invention, is this idea that there is an AI inside his suit. It's something that came later. In the comics originally, it is literally a mechanical iron suit that he will move around. And the idea with this Extremis is the updating of that, so it is more an extension of him, something that he can move at a moment's notice, something that is linked directly to his brain. Mm-hmm. So that is just his PA. Pepper is no longer his PA at this point. I think I'm right in saying that Happy and Pepper are married at this point.
Okay.
Yeah, this is what happens obviously with comics, where you've got sort of 40 years of history leading up to this. These characters are very separate from what you end up with in the film. Mm-hmm. So yeah, obviously Happy was originally Tony Stark's bodyguard, ultimately went off with Pepper Potts and got married, and then things didn't end well there. But yeah, I mean, that's just trivia. But on the subject of trivia, I believe it is time for our very first Christmas Iain's Egg Hunt. I don't know if it is a Christmas Iain's Egg Hunt. Iain's Egg Hunt. Iain's Egg Hunt. Iain's Egg Hunt.
I'm not yoking you. Right, so this week I've got a few Easter eggs and a few Christmas eggs.
What is a Christmas egg?
An egg that you eat at Christmas? A hard-boiled egg? I don't know.
Is that what you have for Christmas, is it?
Happy Christmas, have an egg. Right, so
which is it going to be then? Christmas egg or Easter egg to start?
I'll do the Easter eggs, move on to the Christmas eggs.
As is tradition.
So first of all, the Mandarin, or the fake one, has a tattoo on the back of his neck, which is actually Captain America's shield. But rather than the star, he's got an A, which I'm assuming stands for anarchy.
Yeah, I think it was actually the anarchist symbol, which is that sort of stylized A.
Yeah, so that's a nice little tie-in. Mm-hmm. Also, when Pepper is in bed with Tony and he has his panic attack dream, the T-shirt that she is wearing is actually the same T-shirt that Peter Parker wears at the end of Homecoming.
Oh,
when Tony's walking with him and they're about to do the big reveal, he's wearing the T-shirt that Pepper wears in bed.
So does that imply that Peter and Tony slept together?
My take on that is maybe that's just a T-shirt that he gave to Peter. I don't know.
What's on the T-shirt?
It's like it's a blue T-shirt with like scientific symbols.
Maybe it's just the sort of showing that Tony and Peter are very similar people. They would own the same clothes.
Yeah, I mean, I assume it's Tony's T-shirt that Pepper's wearing.
Yeah, no, I get that, but why is then Peter wearing it?
I don't know. Moving on to my next point. When Iron Man 3 came out, that would have been after Disney had acquired the rights. So there are a couple of references to the number 23, which I'm assuming is a reference to D23, Disney's Comic-Con.
Yeah.
23 can be seen on the reg plate of Tony's Audi. When he pulls up to the house, it says Start 23. And also later on, after the house has been destroyed, it's on the top and the back of a police car.
Oh, okay.
And the last of my Easter eggs is that on the side of Killian's boat, right at the end of the film, it says Roxxon,
right,
which is an energy company. It was previously known as Roxxon Oil Company.
Yeah, I mean, that's sort of Marvel's equivalent of Exxon, which obviously is a real-world oil company. And then sort of Roxxon have grown to be sort of multinational corporation with shady underpinnings within Marvel.
Yeah, so it also makes an appearance in several other Marvel properties.
Yeah.
Mainly the TV shows. So there's in Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Agent Carter, Daredevil, Cloak and Dagger, and Iron Fist. However, I think that last one's a mistake because I don't remember a live action Iron Fist.
I think you need to up your research game there. Something's not quite right with websites you're using. But yeah, also it's mentioned again in this film, isn't it? It's the chap that the fake Mandarin kills is a Roxxon board member. So yes, so there were ties to this film as well.
Yeah, so moving on to my Christmas eggs. Not sure if you noticed, but on the fireplace, Jarvis has his own Christmas stocking.
All right, okay, that's cute.
Which is quite nice. And my final one is that Iron Man 3 is the most successful film that's based at Christmas. It's actually number 20 on the highest grossing movie list. This film made just over 1.2 billion, which is ridiculous.
Yeah, that's a lot of money. But no, thank you for your Easter eggs. They were delicious. Tasty chocolate. And your Christmas eggs, I don't know, some sort of stuffing. I'm a bit confused by these, but thank you regardless. Shall we get back to the films and the comics and wrap things up for Christmas?
Haha, wrap things up.
So you said there, and I noticed you chose your words very carefully, that it is the highest grossing film set at Christmas. So this being our Christmas episode, would you consider this a Christmas film?
If I'm honest, not really. You've got Christmas elements. You've got Christmas elements.
Christmas elephants.
Christmas elements. You've got Christmas elements sprinkled throughout. But, I mean, if you take them out, not really. I mean, it wouldn't change the film.
Yeah, see, this is an argument I had with people about Die Hard last Christmas. It's the reason I'm no longer invited to theirs for Christmas. They said the same thing there, is if you removed the setting of Christmas from Die Hard, it would, not affect the film. Which I disagree with, because I think you could take that to a logical extreme to say, if you removed the setting of Christmas from Home Alone, and it was just about two people breaking into someone's house to rob them and him brutally beating them up as he does so, it wouldn't be a Christmas film anymore. But it is. I still would consider Home Alone absolutely a Christmas film.
Yeah, I mean, with Home Alone, I feel that the Christmas part does play a strong part within the film.
But what part does it play? So if you set that during the summer and the family was going on their summer holidays, and the kid got left behind and there's some robbers broke in, it would be the same story.
Oh, I kind of feel that at Christmas people get more excited over Christmas than they do like their summer holidays. So if you did change it to going on holiday for the summer and if they get their child, you kind of go, well, that makes these parents terrible. Even though they are anyway.
No, they're awful parents either way.
Yeah, they are.
Doesn't matter how many vans she gets into with tuba players and polka music. Doesn't make it any better that she left her child alone on Christmas.
I think the idea of it is when they're going on holiday and they get all excited and there's this huge family, I think the excitement towards Christmas plays a big part within this. If they go on holiday in the summer, then not really.
My point being that if you removed the Christmas element from that film, the central prospect of the film still works. As does Die Hard, as does this. So what is the differentiation between Home Alone being a Christmas movie and Iron Man 3 and Die Hard being a Christmas movie?
Well, I'm one of those people that I do call Die Hard a Christmas film.
Oh, absolutely.
But when it comes down to it, again, it's not really, it's set at a Christmas party. But with this, it might be because it's a whole part of MCU. If this was just solely one film about Christmas and Iron Man, then yeah, I probably would call it a Christmas film. But because it's a sequel and it's part of the MCU as a whole, I don't count it as a Christmas film.
But there are so many references to Christmas in it. I mean, from the off, well, actually, it starts at New Year's 1999, but after that, there's Christmas music, several Christmas songs are played, there is Christmas trees, Christmas decorations, Christmas lights, stockings, pretty much in every single scene. I think Tony Stark's closing lines to Pepper on the barge are about Christmas. There's so many references to it. And that's the case with a lot of Shane Black's films.
I mean, if this film came out 20, 30 odd years back, then it might have had time to become a classic. I think that's the thing with these older Christmas films that aren't quite Christmas films, but we do still class them as, is that they've been out for so many years that they've become classics and therefore they are counted as Christmas films.
Yeah. In fact, I'm going to throw in Lethal Weapon as a Christmas film. It's definitely a Christmas film. It's all about that emerging partnership between the two characters. Riggs ends up spending Christmas at Murtaugh's house. But again, it's one of these films that doesn't make the is it a Christmas film list, which ironically I think is also written by Shane Black, so he's just obsessed with Christmas, that man. So I like to think that Shane Black Christmas has its own separate genre, but every single one of them is absolutely a Christmas movie.
Okay.
So anyway, let's get back to the films and the comics. Reading the comic for the first time, did you enjoy it?
I mean, Yeah, I suppose. I mean, in my opinion, it's not a great comic.
Oh.
Although it is worth reading to see the different version of Tony Stark.
Yeah, because this is, as I said earlier, widely considered one of the best Iron Man comic books available in terms of storylines. I prefer Matt Fraction's run that follows it, but this definitely laid the groundwork for pretty much everything Iron Man became, including in the films.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I reckon there's, as you've just said there, more interesting storylines for Iron Man. And because I literally read this in a couple hours, in just one straight run, I put it down and I thought, did I like that? Not really. But then once I had time to think about it, I thought, well, actually, yeah, I did. I think if you'd asked me that as soon as I put it down, I would have said no. But once I had time to reflect on the characters and the storyline, then yeah, I suppose I did.
Yeah, I mean, all things considered, reading things from your perspective, it's a fairly straightforward storyline where Tony has to update himself to battle a new emergent enemy.
Mm-hmm.
Putting it in context is what I think has made this comic book so revolutionary in its sort of approach to the character.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it introduced a lot of these ideas that we're now so used to with Tony Stark. And I think, yeah, absolutely. If I was in your position, I hadn't read an Iron Man comic before and I was used to these films, which came afterwards and used a lot of the ideas from it, I would think, well, what's all the fuss about? But I think if you then compare it to what came before, is where you would notice that this was sort of an upgrade and a repositioning of that character within the Marvel Universe.
Yeah. Would you say there's a certain way to read and to watch this film?
I'd say that they're distinct enough from each other that you could do one or the other. I think the Extremis storyline, because it incorporates, as you said earlier, elements of Tony's backstory, I think it's a really good storyline if you've not read an Iron Man comic before to pick up and read this one. It'll give you enough of his backstory along with a modern storytelling technique that will allow you a sort of an entry point to Tony Stark. I think it's distinct enough from the films that you can watch the films separately. I struggle to think that anyone listening to our podcast has not already watched the MCU films, but as I say, it gives you enough of an introduction, I would say. I mean, if you haven't watched the Iron Man films, I would say read Extremis first. It'll give you a nice introduction to the character, and then you can go out and watch the films.
Yeah.
What about you?
So, well, that's a fair point to say, really. I mean, I don't think there's any sort of order you need to read it in because they are so different. Yeah, the Extremis itself is the same in both, really. But yeah, it's not a page-to-screen adaptation.
No, but it's interesting, I think, to see the turning point where they clearly were angling for Tony Stark to become a more mainstream superhero as he eventually became. You know, went from this sort of B-tier superhero because obviously Marvel had sold off the rights to all of their mainstream ones. You know, X-Men, Spider-Man had all been sold off to other companies. So they had to sort of make do with what they had left and repositioning Iron Man into this mainstream superhero. I think it does a really good job at that. You know, a superhero for the future.
It does do a really good job of, like we said, with Rebirth. It tells a story and also then explains a little bit of history as well, so you're not too lost.
Yeah.
If they took out the elements of the history, I don't think I would have enjoyed it as much.
So generally speaking, not your favourite Marvel Cinematic Universe film, but not one you dislike?
Yeah, I'd say so.
And generally speaking, not your favourite comic book, but not one you dislike?
Yeah, I'd say so.
Good. I think that wraps things up nicely there.
I think I'm more likely to rewatch the film again than I am to read the comic again.
Fair enough. So any other Christmas business?
Well, actually, there is something. Oh, can you hear that?
No.
Ho, ho, ho. It's the Christmas comic quiz.
The what?
The Christmas comic quiz. What I've done this week.
Oh, the CCQ.
Yeah, the famous segment that we do every week.
Yeah, well, every Christmas. It's of course. It's how could I forget? It's our traditional Christmas comic quiz.
Right, so
we do it every Christmas.
This week, what I've done is I've got here 6 comic book storylines.
Right.
And it's up to you to tell me if they're real or fake.
Okay. Right. Well, listeners, by the way, this is as a surprise to me as it is to you, but okay.
Right, so the first one, the Justice League have to investigate who killed Santa. Is that a real storyline or a fake one?
I tell you what, I've been watching a lot of the Teen Titans Go cartoon lately, so I'm going to say true.
Correct. It is real. It was from Justice League of America, Volume 1, number 110, which came out in 1974. Technically, it's not the real Santa. It's a guy that's dressed up as Santa who gives presents to orphans.
So they're investigating a mall Santa's death.
Yeah.
That seems like a job for a normal policeman rather than the Justice League.
And so far, you've got 100%. Well done.
Nailing it. Should we call it there?
Second one is Ghost Rider is mistaken for Santa Claus by a blind kid.
Okay.
Is that real or fake?
I'm gonna go true again.
Correct. It is true. Marvel Holiday Special, Volume 1, 1991.
Wow.
The kid mistakes him for Santa because the chain that he wears sounds like bells, and he wears boots, and the kid touches his boots.
What is the kid touching his boots?
I don't know. I've not read these. This is just something that I put together.
You surprised me. Okay.
Number 3. Superman sings Christmas carols with the police.
I mean, that sounds too plausible to be true, so I'm going to say false.
Well done.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, well done. It was too plausible because it was actually Batman who sings carols with the police.
Yeah, no, see, if you had said that, I would have also said false, I think.
It's Batman 219 called The Silent Night of Batman from 1970.
Amazing.
So yeah, it's a Batman who sings with the GCPD. So far, so good.
It's going well.
Okay, the fourth one is Captain America saves Santa from Hitler.
I'm going to go false again.
False. It's actually true.
Okay.
This is from the Marvel Age 109.
Yeah.
From 1992, so fairly recently.
Amazing.
Captain America tells some orphans
for that to
a Christmas story about how he had to stop Hitler from shooting Santa in the head.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, they did some weird things with Cap in the 90s. But yeah, didn't know about that one.
The fifth one, and there's only 6, so don't worry.
Okay.
The Hulk has to protect Lapland from evil elves.
Well, I mean, I don't know what to believe anymore. Anything could be true in comic book. I'm going to say true.
Nope, false. Completely made that one up. And the final one is quite a dark one, actually. Constantine snorts the ashes of Santa.
Oh, that's absolutely something that Constantine... Yeah, true. Definitely would do that.
Exactly, yeah. Actually came out in 2008, Hellblazer Volume 1, number 247. And while he does it, he does say, looks like it's going to be a white Christmas after all.
Classic. Well, so how did I do? That was 4 out of 6 then.
4 out of 6. Well done.
I'll take it. All right, well, that's good. I like it. Well, let's go from questions from you to questions from our listeners. Should we move on to Ask the Teapot?
We shall indeed.
Ask the Teapot. Close enough. So, this week we have a couple of questions. First of all, James from Southampton asks, where do you get your back issues from? I would like to get back into reading comics, but not sure where to start. Are there any arcs which would be a good entry? Previously read Amazing Spider-Man and X-Men. So, what do you think?
Okay. I tend to get my single issues from eBay personally, but I do tend to buy a book as a whole. So if they do a book of like 6 issues.
Yeah.
But you can also, if you pop into any local comic book shop, it does take a little bit of time to go through the boxes, but you do find a fair few old ones in there.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the thing, isn't it? Generally speaking, if you're looking to read sort of back issues or read previous arcs, you're better off going for something like a trade paperback or an omnibus, you know, collected edition. But yeah, if you're looking to get hold of old issues, eBay obviously is a great resource for that, but try and frequent your local comic book store first of all. If you go into, if you're Southampton based, there's the Southampton Comics at the Loft Ladder. You could pop in there and have a little rummage through theirs. They've got a really good selection of varying ages. If it's just looking to get back into reading single comic books, then there are subscription services and pull lists. Again, if you have a local comic book shop, go into there and ask to be put on a pull list for a certain comic you're interested in. If you don't, then you can go online. Forbidden Planet have a subscription service, for instance, that is very good, and they will just send you out the comics each month at a slightly reduced rate if you subscribed.
Actually, also, if you pop into some charity shops, because I believe that we found in a charity shop Iron Fist and Power Man.
Yeah, that was the Oxfam in the corner of East Street. Yeah, absolutely. There's some good comic books to be found in there occasionally. Yeah. Often you have to go to the sort of books and vinyl equivalents, which you have, which if for American listeners are sort of, thrift stores. Is that the sort of thing they have over there?
I guess so.
As for points of entry, you previously read Amazing Spider-Man or X-Men. I'd probably say for X-Men, a recent point of entry that's very good is House of X and Powers of 10 and Dawn of X by Jonathan Hickman. Very recent re-establishing of the X-Men within the Marvel Universe. And for Spider-Man, there's the Amazing Spider-Man run by Nick Spencer, which started about 50 issues ago, been published twice a month. Is very good. I'm not completely up to date on that one, but I hear it's very good right up to the current day. I'm also a big fan of his Superior Foes of Spider-Man run. So that's very good to read as a companion piece. What about you? Anything you've read so far that you would recommend?
Well, regarding the pod, I would definitely recommend Scott Pilgrim. That 6 books, and it stands on its own, which is good. There's no history, there's no retcons, all of this sort of stuff, which is good. I mean, other than that, I tend to pick up one-shots, so it's a good way just to read a single-issue comic. If there's a certain character that you like, then just search the character followed by one shot and see what comes up.
Yeah, great shout. So next we have a follow-up question from a previous question asker. At It's Kirsty B on Twitter asks, thank you for answering my question with a question. I apologise about that. I've just read through my first comic because I wanted to know who the second killer in The Long Halloween was. Definitely enjoyed it and the familiar characters. I'd be interested in something crime-related. Okay. Recommendations?
Well, I've not read many crime comics apart from what we've sort of touched on in this, like The Long Halloween. But I have watched Jessica Jones, the TV show, so I don't know if any sort of... Well, that has a very crime drama sort of feel to it, so I don't know if there are any comics out there that would follow those lines.
Yeah, I mean, there's, in terms of Jessica Jones, if you're interested in that, by the way, Alias by Brian Michael Bendis, the run from the comics is very good. Yeah, I mean... whodunits in comic books don't tend to happen that often. There are the follow-ups to The Long Halloween, Dark Victory, and there's also Hush by Jeff Loeb, both of which are sort of mysteries. But my recommendation would be, if you are looking for a genuinely excellent whodunit, which is also a crime noir, I would say The Fade Out by Ed Brubaker and Sean Phillips. Really excellent comic book.
Nice.
And that's all for this week. Thank you very much for all our question askers.
Thank you for all our listeners.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, thank you all for listening this episode and indeed this year. We wish you all a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and we hope that we continue to entertain you in the new year and that you continue listening to us.
Yeah, we'll be back in the new year with a special month, which we're calling X Month.
So if you are interested in that, make sure that you subscribe to whatever your preferred podcast listening platform is.
And if you fancy our shortened down segments, be sure to check out our videos on our YouTube channel.
Thank you again, and tune in next year for some more episodes.
If you enjoyed Iron Man Extremis and want to read more about Tony Stark, then I'd look at picking up the Eisner Award-winning Invincible Iron Man by Matt Fraction and Salvador Larroca, a generally excellent title that ran from 2008 to 2012. Now, we are just starting out and value your feedback, so if you have a comment on the show or a question for Ask the Teapot, then you can email us at becometheteapot@hotmail.com or tweet us at becometheteapod. We are also sporadically on Instagram, so make sure to check us out there for all sorts of behind-the-scenes bits. Next episode, as teased earlier, it's X Month. Yes, giant-sized January. We are going to be focusing on Marvel's Merry Mutants as we begin a whole month of X episodes. So, where better to start than where we probably should have done 7 episodes ago? The film that launched the Fox franchise all the way back in the year 2000, X-Men. Now, the film is a whole mishmash of things and doesn't really adapt any particular storyline, so instead, I'm going to use this as an excuse to give Iain a crash course in Xology and recap on the early days of X-Men as we read Ed Piskor's X-Men Grand Design. That's all for us this episode, and indeed this year. A very Merry Christmas to all of our listeners, and we hope to see you in the new year.
Happy New Year, everyone. Ho, ho, ho. Merry Christmas. And a Happy New Year.
Nice.